Hello, everyone. My name is Nadia Davis, and I am honored today to be our moderator for the Feminism Live Talk in relation to our Feminism Teach Out that is live on Coursera. I am a student at the University of Michigan studying organizational studies. I also serve as the co founder and lead facilitator of the Gender Consciousness Project and as a student fellow for the Center of Academic Innovation. Also today, we have our expert panelists who will be answering questions that we have received from the Teach Out and also some other questions from learners. I will begin by introducing Professor Melanie Manos. Professor Manos is an interdisciplinary artist and lecturer at the Stamp School of Art and Design at the University of Michigan. She's currently working on visualizing women's work, which uses media to call attention to the invisible labor of women in society, which is also the basis of the forthcoming course from the Center of Academic Innovation on using art media for social justice. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Ketra Armstrong, who is a professor of sports management and the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the University of Michigan School of Kinesiology. She is also the director of the Center for Race and Ethnicity in Sports, and she is an affiliate faculty member in the Department of Afro-American and African Studies and Women's Studies, and also the University of Michigan NCAA faculty athletics representative. Finally, I would like to introduce Kyra and Nyla Hooper, who are both students at Belleville High School and students of my own, as they are both participants of the Gender Consciousness Project. I'd also like to note that the audience can drop questions live in the chat function throughout the day or throughout our talk, and we will try to answer them as diligently as possible. So the first question that I would like to ask the panelists is a very broad question, and I think would be perfect to kind of start off our conversation today. And that question is, what does feminism mean to you, and how has your own definition of feminism morphed over time?
Feminism, for me, what it means for me is it is really my lifeline. It is embedded in who I am. And when I say lifeline, I mean that I feel once I really became to understand that feminism was an idea, a concept, and I felt, of course, this makes sense. This is what I am. Then it was just always inextricably part of who I am and how I define myself. It is part of my professional practice in terms of the premise for many of the projects that I make. And it also is a big part of my community.
I'll go next. So, so when I think of feminism, so like essentially like equality, regardless of biological sex, gender identity, gender expression, etc. Right, right, physically, economically, politically, etc. Right, people should have the opportunity for the fullness of life, regardless of their sex. But it's really interesting. I was a feminist, I think, before I even knew it. And I think one of the things that was unique for me in my household, my mother and my father, they weren't so ascribed to these gender roles. Like my mom didn't mind going outside doing yard work. And let me tell you, my dad was a cook. He could cook a mean cake like you won't believe. Betty Crocker had nothing on my dad, just so you know. And so I didn't grow up with a woman does this, a man does this, a woman can do this, a woman cannot. I mean, I didn't have those gender roles that were so concrete in my house. And I think the other part, for me, I was an athlete. And thankfully, I was a good athlete. And so because of that, it sort of gave me privilege that some of the other girls did not have. Because I was a good athlete, guys would pick me first before other guys to play sports. Now, that did something to the psyche of the guys who got picked after me, but that was their issue. It wasn't my issue. And so I didn't realize that people went through life with these barriers of, oh, I can't do this because I'm a woman, or I shouldn't do this, or this is only for men. So for me, my understanding of feminism really emerged over the years when I saw how it had put people in buckets and put people in constraints that I didn't experience. I didn't see it in my family. And as an athlete, I didn't have to walk through life that way.
Well, thank you for sharing. My definition of feminism is women empowering one another, coming together to uplift one another, and so gender roles are not a thing. For me personally, my definition of feminism have morphed and changed because of when I joined the group Women Up. Um, we it was a different it was a different feeling for me to come together as women and go through the same experiences and have the same experiences being in a patriarchal society.
Yeah, and for me to answer the second part of the question, when before I joined Women's Up, I thought feminism was all about girls just showing that they can have the same equality as guys and that they can be as strong as guys. But being in Women's Up, it really has taught me that feminism is much more than that. It's about women empowering each other, standing there with each other, having each other's back, and working together to make a change and to make a movement that's really important to them.
Awesome. And for the audience, I just wanted to note that the Gender Consciousness Project is actually encompassed between 4 different schools. And so at their high school, Belleville High School, which is also the high school I went to, the high school that I teach in, their group specifically is called Woman Up. So if you hear Kyra and Nyla refer to Woman Up, it is also synonymous to the Gender Consciousness Project. Okay. So our next question is, can you talk about how some of your projects enact feminism?
I can chime in. One of the things that, even following up on the last question, as my understanding and immersion in this space, evolved, one of the things that I realized was when people talked about feminism, it was really different for women of color. Oftentimes, when they talk about gender and they talk about feminism, they're talking about issues for white women. And when the issue was centered on race, it really focused on Black men. And so Black women are in this crossroads of not fitting in either of those buckets separately, but both of those buckets and others, class, ability, orientation, simultaneously. And so I realized that in my projects dealing with, for example, sport, in the area of sport, my research on sport leadership, I've tried to, as Nyla and Kyra was saying, I've tried to do research to empower women to understand that, yes, this is a space of sport leadership that's Eurocentric, is male-centric, but there's a place for us. And Black women have exhibited the characteristics of leadership for a long time. Even in the civil rights movement, Black women were present. So I've used my research to help Black women feel empowered and see themselves and to understand the skills that life has required Black women to perfect can be transferable into the domain of sport. So I've tried to use my research as a way of first of all, writing in a voice that's been silenced far too long, but also empowering girls and women to have aspirations to be sport leaders. And so that's what I've tried to do in my scholarship, but also in my teaching. I teach a class, Leadership and Diversity in Sport. And again, I'm trying to empower everyone, but I'm really mindful and really intentional to amplifying the voices and the experiences of Black women.
I'll go off of that with my project, Visualizing Women's Work. We are really looking at the devaluation of women and how, if women in many times are in supportive roles and leadership roles, but in those supportive roles, it's seen as insignificant, not worthy of pay, not worthy of commemoration. And it's what keeps, countries running, keeps families running. Women are working everywhere in every part of their lives, but they are and often, in many ways, devalued and diminished. So I try to bring that into my work. And I use humor in my work in a lot of ways because I have to. It's part of who I am, but it's also, I have to find joy also. So it is a way for me not only to find joy, but to poke fun at the absurdity of of the fact that certain things, certain gender, certain jobs are more valued than others. What could be more valuable than raising a child or educating, paying a K through 12 teacher well? These things that have gotten so, in my opinion, misaligned. And I feel that it's so greatly absurd that I want to point that out. So that is one of the ways I bring it in. And I think that, well, maybe I'll let someone else talk. Maybe, yeah.
Okay, so yes, with the project that we are part of, Women Up, or the Gender Consciousness Group, we we have a symposium every year, and with that symposium, we uplift the our feminist groups and young girls who also can connect with us and bring out their stories so they can tell their stories as well, and so we come together and uplift one another with that.
Most definitely, when I first joined this group, my sister, she actually introduced me to it. And I know myself, I was very unconscious of the power that I held within my own voice as being a young African American woman or girl. And in my life, I know I experienced a lot of roles where I am surrounded by a lot of men. And me being very advanced at what I do, I place up with them, or I am equal to like where they stand. So I have to be very conscious with how I present myself, or very conscious with what I say or how I do, because it can affect the outcome of the situation or the environment that I am in, and how people look at me.
Yeah, and I'd also like to point out a lot of commonalities between what all the panelists are saying right now, because, and speaking from the facilitator side of the Gender Consciousness Project, kind of something that Kyra had already touched on, we have a symposium every year, and to kind of combine Dr. Armstrong's point and Professor Manos' point, in what we do, we try to, in our project, we try to teach the girls what feminism means in their own terms. So what does that mean at Belleville High School? What does that mean in all the other schools that we work in? What is the culture like at the schools and the communities that we're entering in? And what matters most in these communities? And so we really try to gear the symposium projects, but also our conversations in general, around what these girls are seeing in their communities and what they want to challenge, what they want to change, and what they want to see in their ideal world. So I think that, and a lot of that is expressed through art, like Professor Manos's project was kind of emphasizing on. So I think that's really cool how we all have kind of our own versions and definitions of what feminism is, but we share a lot of similarities, and we share a lot of commonalities within our different projects. So I think that's just a testament to how amazing and diverse feminism can be, really. So our next question. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Armstrong.
Real quick, I'm sorry. One thing I'd be remiss if I didn't say, those of you in the teach out, the first part of the teach out, I talk about gender ideology, but the gendering of sport leadership, what I think is critically important is that we have data. And so the other way that I use feminism and what I'm doing is feminist research. And that is so critically important. I know we're going to talk about changing the culture. Data really helps. And so what I tried to do with the research that I conducted on behalf of the governor with the Michigan Task Force on Women in Sport is to gather data, not just from women, but from men and women, to exacerbate the gaps, to really show how profound the inequities are. So I find that having data to tell the story really helps us to make a change. So I just wanted to add that another way of us changing the landscape is gathering data, and the numbers can speak for themselves. And that's the other thing that I'm trying to do, is engage in feminist research to elucidate the disparities and the inequities, and so that the data can speak for themselves.
And then I would add to that is that making that data available and visible, and in a variety of ways, a variety of formats, so that it becomes readily available to people, and also more prominent.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. I think our next question, I would like to have Dr. Armstrong, if you could answer first, and then the rest of the panelists can also chime in, because your what you had said earlier about gender roles really got me thinking about this question. But what is the place of men or people who don't identify as women in feminism? And is feminism even the right word for the equality for everyone?
I don't know if feminism is the right word. I've struggled with that word for a long time because, again, feminism in so many ways was such associated with elements of whiteness. And as a woman of color, I didn't live it the same way. So I don't know. That's maybe that's the project that panelists will work on, a new word instead of feminism. But I will say that we do need male allies. And the thing is this, I think we need to engage males in this struggle. And I think we need to involve them because, many of them have the power, and we need to change the ideology and the consciousness of those people who are making decisions. In many places, it's the men who are making those decisions. So I do think that we should involve the men. But while I think we should hear their voices, we should not center their voices. We can't make their voices the norm, but we do need them to be a part of the struggle. In the teach out, at the end of the first teach out, I reminded people that men can be feminists too. In sports, let me just tell you something real quickly. So I teach a class, gender in sports, and trying to help the guys in my class to know that they have a role in helping us to impact change. I do an assignment, and this assignment requires them to talk to someone in their class to understand their sport history. And so many of the guys in the class, they interview their mothers, they interview their sisters, they interview their female relatives. It is amazing how that changes them because they get to hear how their mother experienced inequity, how their sisters experience inequity. And now they're appalled, like, how dare you do that to my mother? How dare you do that to my sister? And so I find that when the experience becomes personalized and they can touch it, it makes them want to do something. And all the guys in my class, they come back after the assignment, what can I do to help? That's just wrong. It's like, so now it's wrong because it's your mother. Now it's wrong because it's your sister. It wasn't wrong before, but now it's wrong. Look, whatever it takes. So we need them, but we need to be gentle with them. We don't need to beat them up. We need to meet them where they are and engage them in an experience that can help them understand what it might be like to walk in someone else's shoes. Guys don't think about the things that girls have to think about. So we have to put them in that position to get them to learn and to understand. And from my perspective, I have seen, for Title IX in sports, when you have a daddy that has a daughter, he pays attention, right? Because he doesn't want his little girl to miss out on sport opportunities. So we need male allies. We need them to be advocates. But we don't need to center their voices as the norm, because that's what happens sometimes is they just take over. And we have to welcome them, but we have to welcome them in a way that doesn't further marginalize women. So we do need male allies, and men can be feminists. So we do need to work on that word. I get it, because men feel like, well, I'm a feminist. What does that mean about my masculinity? It's a tricky thing. But yes, men can be feminists, and we need male allies.
And I think to add to that, some of the things that I have seen that I think are really positive are presenting men in nurturing roles, seeing them as fathers, seeing them as caregivers, and normalizing that so that it is infuriating in that, okay, now we give it's like something like a nurse more value because men are coming in, that can be infuriating. But at the same time, we do want to say, like, let's get rid of the gender stereotypes. That's what I always had to fight against when I was growing up. I did see a lot of, unlike Ketros in my family, Dr. Armstrong, there were kind of these roles that we were kind of expected to play, and I really pushed against it. I would like to say here that I played Little League Baseball the first year they allowed girls to try out, and I got in. Thank you. And the interesting thing is that out of the blue, I don't even use Facebook that much, but I get a text message through Facebook from someone that found me that I was in high school with and said, I talked about you to my daughters because I wanted them to know how you forged ahead with that. And I wanted them to do that in their lives, and they did. And he went on to tell me about them, and he seemed very proud. And I thought, isn't that fantastic? You know, sometimes it is reaching one person at a time. There was a question in the chat about do we really need men as supporters for empowering women? And I feel where that question is coming from. Sometimes you just want to say, you know, why even? But I think that for the person asking that question, I would say you surround yourself with the people that you feel that empower you. And then, but remember that men are part of this planet also. So maybe it's not how you find your power or your feminist community does, but we do want to have equality across the board. So that's how I would respond, if that's helpful.
Yes, I can agree with both Dr. Armstrong and Professor Manos. Bringing men inside of the feminist, the outside of a feministic group, I feel like is very necessary because it brings not only inclusion, but it when you make the situation more personal, they can understand it more, and I feel like it's a very necessary move to do.
Yeah, and most definitely, I think it's really important how we explain it to them and how we um, let them understand like how we view it, like our point of view of the situation, so that they can relate more and understand and say, "Oh, I truly get what you're saying. I would love to work with you. I would love to help you." And once they get that down, I think we can really have men and women work together on this movement.
I think the careful part, kind of going back to that question, is I do think we need male allies, as I mentioned before. We need them to be advocates, but understand this is a fine line. We don't need them to validate our experience. That's the difference. We don't need their validation, and bringing them in is not a way of validating. Yes, there really are issues. That is so not what we're suggesting, right? We're saying we can feel empowered in and of ourselves, but having male allies is important. But I think the problem is when men are used to validate the problem, to validate that there's something going on, and that is not what we're suggesting.
Yeah, and I think to kind of talk a little bit about my own experience as well, as a facilitator for GCP, this was not personally this. It was kind of like a social experiment. It wasn't necessarily in the high school that I work in at Belleville, but it was another high school called Central Academy, which is in Ann Arbor. And this high school had their conversations were mainly driven by gender roles and how they felt uncomfortable in school being around, because they have a very, very small school, kind of being, I guess, tormented by the boys in their school about how they were saying you should be in the kitchen and you should do this and you should do that. Very, very stereotypical gender roles conversations going on in those schools. And so what they did was they invited the boys in their school to their meetings, and they had the boys sit in on their conversations about that they were having about them in school. And so the result of that was pretty interesting because there was a lot of intergroup dialogue between the boys in the school and the girls, and this would be a little bit difficult to replicate in Belleville because it's a way bigger school, but for their community that really ended up paying off in the long run because those boys, kind of like how Dr. Armstrong was saying, were able to personalize, okay, these are my actions, these are how they're feeling about what I said, so how do I move forward in changing my behavior, which I thought was extremely interesting and a great way to kind of approach that situation. So I would like to ask this question to start off, Professor Manos, because this is something you briefly touched on earlier, and also the rest of the panel obviously can chime in on their thoughts as well. So how can we enable people, especially women, raised in households that are more traditional, to fully shed their biases, including internalized misogyny, against feminism?
I really think it is reaching out through community. So making community groups available to them, discussion groups, so they come into the conversation. And if you're talking about someone in a very traditional household, they may be feeling a lot of the things that feminism is articulating, but don't feel able to express it, or maybe they have misunderstandings of what it is, and just need a friendly conversation, not something saying you are you're outdated, or without judgment, being supportive, and again finding as many community resources as possible. So I think that goes back to getting the data out, to having these kind of conversations intergenerationally. I have this with my mother. I have conversations with her, and I'm like, "See, Mom, you are a feminist." Because she'll be doing so, or she'll say something. She goes, "Well, that's not right," and I'm like, "This is exactly what I'm saying, Mom." So I don't have a sweeping answer for that, but I think it is just making more and more resources available in different types of languages, in different types of there was a question about what's your favorite book, and I brought a book that has feminism in graphic design. So meaning not the graphic, meaning there's graphic illustrations. So it's kind of like reading a comic book, but it's very well done. And I'm like, that's terrific. That's one way of visualizing. So a teenager or a preteen might get their hands on that more readily than a heavily academic book. But someone who is in a traditional family, how do we get information to them? And that is not threatening.
Yes, I would say that's almost the same thing. Continue to get the resources out there. Even doing, just having that conversation so a better understanding could be available to them. Putting videos up online, continuing groups like our gender conscious group so they can have a place to come and talk. I feel like that's would be a great way.
Would anybody else like to comment on this question before we move on to the next question?
I think that internalized misogyny is tough. It's a tough one, and to overcome. And I think with anything, it's the first step is awareness, saying, "Wait, this is actually not right." And sometimes you need to hear it from someone else, saying, "Identify this. This is actually misogynistic. This is not okay." And oftentimes that's the very first step.
Yeah.
Just to add really quick, I think it's really important for people to share their stories, because then they can see that other people can relate to them and be like, "Oh, I'm not alone. Like, it's other people going through this and I can relate to them." And it's really important for us to just show that we can be there for each other and that we can support each other.
Yeah, I think also in my experience with GCP, one thing we like to do, kind of touching on your point of internalized misogyny, Professor Manos, is that we try to, and we touch on this also in the teach out, but trying to get the girls to understand how they collude in their own oppression. And that can be very, very difficult if you identify as a feminist. So if you identify as a feminist, you think, you know all these things, but misogyny is such a broad topic that we think that, okay, I believe in equal rights, so I'm a feminist. So there's no way I'm colluding in my own oppression. But there are some micro level misogynistic attitudes that even women carry, that we have to unlearn, which I continuously go through the process myself, but just start planting the seed and starting that process with Nyla and Kyra and all the other students that we work with pays off in the long run, because when Nyla and Kyra get to college and when they're in their adult lives, they'll think to themselves, "Oh, I learned that this is not supposed to happen," or "I'm not supposed to treat other girls like this," or da 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 da. And now I feel like when I just did this action, okay, this is misogynistic. How do I check my own behavior? It's something that is constantly, once you start the unlearning process, it's constantly in your subconscious, like, okay, was that really inherently feminist what I just did? Or
Yeah.
making that
not
decision.
To be right, and not to be hard on yourself about it, but allow yourself to take steps and have those be steps. Say, okay, I didn't. Why am I doing this? I'm going to question this. This is one of the things I was saying before in my work, where I bring in humor, because I did a piece where I'm climbing a ladder and I'm climbing purposely in these high heels, but in the photo it says, like, okay, why again am I wearing heels? Because I'm trying to identify with the person climbing. Like, she feels that she needs to dress a certain way. This is what society says, like, oh, if I wear heels, I'm taller, so I'm going to be taken, I'm going to take up more space. I'm going to look like more of a leader. I feel like I have to do that. I feel empowered, but I also feel sexy, and the world thinks I should look that way, or whatever it is. And it's not necessarily what makes sense for the situation, but you feel like you have to live up to that expectation. It's a hard one to break because we get so many messages like this. I have a friend that is a filmmaker who doesn't shave her legs, and she's Middle Eastern, and she's got dark hair. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because she told me, she said, my sister was getting married, and I was going to stand, it was in the summer, I was going to stand up in front of everybody. And I was, it's summer, I'm wearing a dress. You can see part of my legs. And I even had to fight with myself, like, should I shave my legs but that's not that goes against of who I am, and why should I have to do that? But I thought it was great that she shared that with me, that she went through that thought process. And she didn't shave her legs because it's not what she does. She wasn't going to do it. And she got up and gave the speech at her sister's wedding. And so I guess I want to say is that you do continue to have these conversations with yourself, and it's okay. We are making advances. We are moving forward, but there's a lot of signals that we get from all areas of news and culture that tell us we should be, this is the way you want to look, or this is the way you're attractive. And so that can be a battle.
Yeah, most definitely. Being aware of your thoughts that you have on a day-to-day basis it's helped me personally a lot, especially with joining the gender conscious group. Because before I joined, I wasn't aware of my thought process. Of course, being true to myself and still being true to myself, but being more aware, it helps a lot.
Yeah, because me also as well personally, I had to redefine my thought process, or how I identify what confidence or self empowerment was, because I was going off of based what society told me, and not based off of what I actually like grew up on, or based off of what I know, like, oh, if I want to do this today, then I can do it. It like society doesn't have to tell me what I can and cannot do. So it was something of a matter where I had to go deep within myself, and then redefine certain definitions that society has taught me.
I also have another question, and I actually want to direct this to Kyra and Nyla, because this is something that we have kind of talked about in our group, but I would also love to hear from Professor Manos and Dr. Armstrong when she comes back about your thoughts on this question. So this is a question from a learner. It says, feminism seems very generational. What do the students wish that older generations understood about their experience, or what the professors would want to pass on to younger generations? And I would love to hear everybody, but Kyra and Nyla, go ahead and start that one.
I would say to the other generations that came before us, just a matter of respect and inclusion of what our thoughts are, that they're okay to have. And in saying that, I mean, as far as gender roles, because in gender roles in an older generation, they were more dominant. In our generation, they're not. Because of course, like us females, we can go play football. Because, for instance, at my school, we had a female football player, but for our older generation, that was like unknown. So I would say just not pushing their thoughts onto us, and but still have that matter of respect in between the two generations.
Yeah, and I think everybody is also entitled to like their own opinion. They're entitled to like, do what they want to do, and but I think it's really important. It's a you can draw the line in between where like respect is, because I think even though we might be different and we might have like different thoughts on things, always respect the other person, even if they're not like you. And I feel like also in this time and like generation, a lot of people, they like to play like follow the leader, or just follow after like what another generation is doing, or what another generation has done, instead of making their own mark, or like making their own statement in a new way. Because society, they can often when something is different, they always call it like weird, or they say that it's unusual. But when you look at it in a more positive light, you can say, oh, that's very unique, that's very creative. So I think that's really important.
Well, I feel like it's intergenerational. I mean, I feel like I'm where I am because of generations of women, many generations before me. And I think it's important to really honor that history. Maybe what the questioner is saying, that there's different circumstances for generation, but I also think we have to think culturally, because it varies widely depending on what culture you're in, where the kind of level of feminism, how far, how strong it has gotten, how free women in the society are. So I really, for me, like wanting to pass on is just love and respect, and that I'm just like so proud of when I see like Kyra and Nyla here, and I think the Gender Consciousness Project, like, keep it going, and it should be everywhere. So that's my 2 cents with it, intergenerationally. Yeah.
I actually think that the younger generation can learn a lot from the previous generations. I remember when I was a doctoral student and I had to do this project. It was a history class, and I was trying to, again, my domain is sport management, and so I was trying to understand the dynamics back in the day. And so I remember having a conversation with my father. I said, I want to do this project. Women are struggling to try to get leadership opportunities and working in men's sports. And he looked at me like, what's the big deal? I'm like, well, the big deal is that we're not getting those opportunities. He said, well, let me tell you. And he told me about a lady, and her name was Miss Kroom. And back in the day, this was like, it had to have been in the 40s, 1940s or so. And he was telling me, he said, back then, someone needed to coach a team. So Miss Kroom said, okay, I'll do it. She coached the men's team. She also, when the guys got injured, she also repaired them. So she was like an athletic trainer, which we would call these days. She drove the bus, and when they needed her to, she officiated. Now, why did that resonate with me is because some of the things that we struggle with now are the things that some of the previous generation, they didn't have a choice to struggle. They just had to do it. They had to find a way despite the odds. And so I find that the notion of the intergenerational conversations, I think that needs to take place. I learned so much just from having a conversation with my dad of how life was back in the day. And get this, they played basketball outdoors. They played outdoors. And now we're struggling. We have these nice facilities, we have training, we have all of these things. And I have to tell you, what that did for me is it gave me a new outlook. It gave me a new perspective, because if they could do it in those times, and Miss Kroom could do it driving the bus and playing on dirt, playing in the rain, the things that they did because they did it, then it's like I feel that sometimes our generation is privileged. Like, I was privileged. I didn't have to deal with those things, And so I do think that even when we talk to girls now, oftentimes girls, when they, particularly in sport, when they look at the television, they look at the scholarships, they look at the facilities, they look at how they travel, and they think that's the norm. It's always been that way. And I try to tell them it has not always been that way. And so I think that in addition to, faculty in our generation passing something to the students, I think it really would be valuable for the students to talk to the previous generations to understand how they did things without people's permission. Women did things back then because life required it. They didn't ask men's permission. They just did it. And so I do think that these type of conversations are helpful. But what I found was they were more inspiring than I thought they would be, because I found out how people did more with less, made the most out of a little. And that inspired me. And that's what I think we need to do for this generation, is to let them know, yes, it may be hard now, but there was a time when it was worse. And so you can do better. You can be better, because life, even though it's not perfect, it's better.
Yes, yes. And I would also just love to emphasize your point, Dr. Armstrong, that we are our ancestors' wildest dreams, that we are, the fact that we're sitting here talking to each other about this conversation is based on the sacrifice of women before us, especially minority women. And that's something that I have definitely come to realize as a college student. And I think my students have also been able to realize, as we have also had times where we have had intergenerational conversations between their mothers and them, which is always refreshing and very interesting. But I also wanted to ask our final question for the day. And again, this is for all, but I'll start with Professor Manos, because she had kind of briefly mentioned this prior. Do you have a favorite book or other resource that impacted how you viewed feminism, and would you recommend it to others? And or how do we find the data that panelists mentioned being needed to support feminist work? And where do we start with that?
I'll start with the first part of that question. I brought the book. So it was like, what was a favorite book, right?
Yes. Book or another resource.
I feel like, or book, another resource. There's something called the Feminist Frequency, and it's women that are looking at gaming and the huge inequities. I'm really interested right now in the huge inequities within cyberspace, right? So data entry in cyberspace. The numbers are really skewed in how much is being inputted by men in kind of a narrow demographic in Silicon Valley, and how do we expand that? So all of this information that's coming at us, we've got to make sure that women are part of that conversation, and we're not enough. So we've got to find ways to do that. That's really important to me. I'm in the visual arts, so like I said before, I found this Feminism, a graphic guide, Kathia Janai, I'm kind of butchering her name, Jananti, with graphic images, because I thought, well, here's another way to bring in the conversation. There's so many authors and writers, scholars that I'm grateful to, but a lot of it also is the individuals that aren't individual role models, that aren't necessarily writing about feminism but are living their lives that way, and looking at how they're living their lives. One name, though, I'll throw out that most of you probably know is Bell Hooks. I just can read her forever, and love listening to Roxane Gay. Can listen to Roxane Gay forever. So those are a few.
Well, a book of mine that really empowered me was Copper Sun by Sharon M. Draper. I read it a few years ago, and the main character, Amari, she escaped slavery by herself. She did it alone with a child. And I felt like that empowered me, because it allowed me to look back at what African Americans went through, but not only African Americans, but African Americans as a female went through. And the fact that she did it by herself, it allowed me to realize, like, okay, I can do this by myself as well. So it just gave me that power from our past, and it put me into my present where I am now. So yeah, Copper Sun by Sharon M. Draper is most definitely one of my favorites.
Yeah, and as well, I actually have a book by Sharon M. Draper called Darkness Before Dawn that I read when I was in high school, and it was about a young lady who was going through a struggle of losing her boyfriend in a car accident, and her boyfriend was always there to like kind of she didn't understand or realize that she found her identity or built her identity with him always being around. So when she lost him, she was going through a struggle of having to find who she was without him. And it's mainly just about her growing and finding her own self-worth as a woman within high school, going through her own struggles. And it's really empowering, really inspiring, and very touching.
So I also add one of my I don't know. I read something every day, something different. Let me tell you my favorite book. This just as an aside, my favorite book all time is like my eighth grade science book. Don't judge me. It has everything that about the stars and things that we thought we'd never need again. So that's one of my favorite books. All right, eighth grade science book. It's fascinating. I still read it to this day. But as it pertains to this conversation, this is the book that changed me. This is the book that allowed me to find myself. It's Black Feminist Thought. This is the second edition. I think there may be another one. But it's by Patricia Hill Collins. And what I love about this book is that before, when I read about feminism, I didn't see me in it. I felt invisible because the struggles that I know my foremothers, it was just a part of their lives. It wasn't addressed. What I love about this book is number one, it centers the Black female experience. It centers it. It doesn't marginalize it. When we talk about gender, sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, Black women are marginalized because of gender. They're marginalized because of race. And so this book actually puts it in the center, and it speaks from the lived experiences of Black women. And what I love about it, there are tenets there of empowerment. So it talks about this legacy of struggle, but it doesn't use the legacy of struggle as a way of victimizing women. I think there was a question that you all talked about internalized misogyny. This book counters all of that. It allows people to embrace the legacy of struggle. That's a part of life. We know that challenges make life interesting. Overcoming challenges makes life meaningful, right? And so in this book, it really talks about the legacy of struggle. But what has this legacy of struggle bred in Black women? It talks about the importance of mothering. So we see mothering and childcare and the ethic of caring differently than other people. But there's some basic core things. One is the ethic of caring. Another one is this internal safe space. So Black women have to find an internal safe space that protects them from the attacks on their personhood, on their womanhood, on their racialhood. And so it also talks about self-definition, not being defined by others, but taking the power to define who you are for yourself. And that kind of deflects the internalized misogyny that I think you all may have been talking about when I was somewhere in cyberspace. But these are the kinds of things. And I love this book because, again, it speaks from a place of empowerment and it addresses social injustices. But it does so without Black women feeling victimized because of their race, victimized because of their class, their ability, their gender, and all the other things. So Black Feminist Thought was the first book that allowed me to see myself and my mother and my grandmother and my aunts and my sisters. I could see the struggle, but I could see how we were changed by the struggle. And we became victors, and we did not let the struggle render us as victims. So this is the book, Black Feminist Thought. And she didn't pay me for this endorsement, by the way. So you know.
Yes, so I will also put in my own little shameless plug before we stop for the day. But one of my favorite books is called Sisters of the Yam by Bell Hooks. It's one of my favorites because I think people think that feminism is very theoretical. It's like too difficult to understand. It's only something about academia. But I think Bell Hooks does an amazing job of transforming what we feel as personal and subjective as something that's inherently feminist. And then she ties that into activism, into the struggle, so that by emphasizing that in order to kind of fight for ourselves as women, at like in racial struggles, in anything, any kind of social movement, we have to take care of ourselves first. And that's something that I never really thought about until I read that book. And so it's definitely one of my, a life-changing book for me at 20 years old. So I'm assuming I'll have more life-changing books to read in the future. But that is going to wrap up our live panel for today. I would love to thank the panelists for joining us and answering these questions and for your expertise. And I would also love to thank the learners for submitting your questions, for sitting in with us today, for engaging with the Teach Out, for engaging with us during this event. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day, night, wherever you're tuning in from. Thank you.